Kellyanne Conway shot up from her chair, her face flushed with anger, jabbing her finger across the committee room at Jonathan Roumie. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she shouted, her voice echoing off the marble walls. But Roumie didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a calm, almost serene smile, the kind of knowing expression that would soon make Conway look utterly foolish in front of the entire nation. What happened over the next 20 minutes wasn't just a heated exchange between a political strategist and an actor. It was the moment when a man known for portraying grace and compassion on screen used nothing but composure, sincerity, and that devastating calm smile to dismantle one of Washington's sharpest conservative voices. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss how this clash unfolds. The committee room buzzed with tension as cameras rolled, capturing every second of what was about to become the most talked about confrontation of the year. Conway, Donald Trump's former senior counselor and one of the most seasoned media warriors in Washington, thought she had cornered Roumie. She was dead wrong. This is the story of how a quiet actor, without a political dynasty, without a seat in Congress, used only poise, preparation, and truth to expose the emptiness of political theater. To understand why this clash was so explosive, you need to know who these two figures were and what brought them to this moment. Kellyanne Conway wasn't just another political consultant. She was a master of spin, the architect of countless media battles, and a veteran of the Trump White House. At 57, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had sparred with the toughest journalists on live television and never backed down. Known for her sharp tongue and her ability to twist narratives, she had built her career on intimidation, clever phrasing, and her unshakable belief that she could out-talk anyone in the room. In committee hearings, Conway was notorious for her prosecutorial style. She leaned forward, spoke over opponents, and used her years of experience to make others look naive. She had done it dozens of times before, and she had every reason to think this day would be no different. Jonathan Roumie, on the other hand, represented everything Conway wasn't. At 50, the New York-born actor was no politician, but he had become a household name for embodying compassion and dignity in front of millions of viewers around the world. Unlike Conway, who thrived on political brawls, Roumie thrived on connection. His reputation was built not on spin, but on the way he made audiences feel heard, understood, uplifted. And on this day, sitting across from Conway in a simple navy suit, Roumie exuded calm. No notes in front of him, no flashy gestures, just a quiet readiness. He had prepared in his own way, reflecting deeply on the legislation, the people it would impact, and the moral stakes at hand. What Conway didn't know was that Roumie had spent the night before combing through every page of the proposal, reading case studies, and speaking with those directly affected. While she relied on her reputation and her rhetorical force, Roumie had armed himself with something much stronger: truth, empathy, and authenticity. This wasn't just another political skirmish doomed to fade from the news cycle. The bill under review would affect millions of families, shaping how the government intervened in their daily lives. For Conway, it was a chance to remind the nation that she was still a force to be reckoned with. For Roumie, it was something bigger, an opportunity to show that integrity and calm could outshine intimidation. The room was packed, reporters, staffers, cameras ready to beam the spectacle live across the nation. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation. Everyone could feel something seismic was about to happen, and none of them expected how completely the tables were about to turn. The contrast between Conway's vague talking points and Roumie's grounded clarity was stark. "Are you referring to the actual impact this bill would have on families?" Roumie asked gently, his voice steady. "On the single mother in Ohio who told me she can't afford her medication? Or the veteran in Texas who said these reforms gave him his dignity back?" Each example was delivered with quiet confidence. Roumie wasn't showing off. He was demonstrating that he had spoken to real people, gathered their stories, and done the work Conway clearly hadn't. Conway shifted in her seat, visibly unsettled. She had expected to intimidate an actor, someone she thought would be lost without a script. Instead, she was facing a man who wasn't impressed by her spin and who grounded every word in lived experience. "Mr. Roumie," Conway said, her voice tightening, "I don't need a lecture on policy from someone who's been grandstanding for the cameras since he got here." The personal attack was a clear sign she was losing control of the exchange. Several committee members glanced at each other uncomfortably. This was exactly the sort of behavior that had made Conway infamous. Roumie didn't react with anger or defensiveness. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and kept that same calm, knowing smile. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said softly. "I was simply trying to have a substantive discussion about the people this bill affects. If you'd prefer not to engage with that, that's fine. But I think the American people deserve more than sound bites and personal attacks. They deserve honesty." The rebuke landed so gently that it took a moment for its weight to register. But when it did, the room seemed to freeze. Roumie had just called out one of the most seasoned political strategists in Washington for dodging substance, and he had done it with grace that made her bluster look even worse. Conway's face flushed red, her hands gripping the table. She had built her entire career on dominating exchanges like this. And now this actor, this outsider, was making her look small in front of the entire nation. "You want to talk about reality?" Conway snapped, her voice rising. "Here's reality. This legislation is going to hurt American families, and anyone supporting it is either naive or doesn't care about the consequences." It was another attempt to swap substance for fear. But Roumie wasn't about to let her off the hook. "I absolutely want to talk about families," Roumie replied, his smile unshaken, "because I've met them. And what they've shown me is the opposite of what you're claiming. Would you like me to share their stories? I think America deserves to hear them." The contrast was impossible to ignore. Roumie had come prepared with testimony, real experiences, and undeniable truths, while Conway was leaning on volume and intimidation. "The families I've spoken with aren't statistics," Roumie continued. "They're people who found hope where there used to be none. I won't share names out of respect for their privacy, but I can tell you this, their lives are improving, not collapsing." For Conway, it was the breaking point. She realized she was being outmaneuvered by someone she assumed was an easy target. And then she snapped. "You know what?" Conway suddenly shouted, her voice booming across the chamber as she leapt from her chair. "I am sick of this sanctimonious nonsense." The outburst was so sudden, so explosive, that several people in the room physically jumped. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail of Conway's flushed face and wild gestures. "You come in here with your stories," she raged, her finger trembling as she pointed at Roumie, "thinking you can lecture me on policy when I've been fighting these battles for decades. You don't know what you're talking about. You're nothing but a performer who thinks he can come to Washington and change everything overnight." Through the entire tirade, Roumie did something extraordinary. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even shift in his seat. Instead, he folded his hands gently, leaned back, and kept that same serene smile he had worn from the start. The contrast was devastating. On one side, a seasoned political warrior, red-faced and shouting. On the other, an actor, calm and composed, looking more like a man watching a tantrum than someone under attack. When Conway finally collapsed back into her chair, breathing heavily, the room was silent. Everyone's eyes turned to Roumie, waiting. He let 10 long seconds pass, long enough for the weight of the meltdown to settle over the chamber, before speaking in a voice so calm it made Conway's screaming seem absurd in retrospect. "Are you finished?" he asked quietly. Conway glared at him but said nothing. "Okay," Roumie continued, his gentle smile never leaving his face. "Then let's be honest about what just happened here, because the American people deserve clarity. Kellyanne Conway just had an emotional breakdown because I asked her to discuss the real impact of this legislation. Instead of addressing the substance, she screamed at me and launched personal attacks." He turned his gaze directly into the camera. "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what's wrong with Washington. They don't deserve to watch grown adults throw temper tantrums when asked to back up their claims with real information," Roumie said softly, his calm smile still in place. But he wasn't done. He had been saving the best for last. "Since Ms. Conway seems unwilling or unable to discuss the actual impact of this bill," Roumie continued, his voice steady but resolute, "let me share what I've seen, what real people have told me. What followed wasn't a masterclass in constitutional law. It was something more powerful, a masterclass in humanity." For the next 5 minutes, Roumie spoke of families he had met, veterans who had regained stability, single parents who had finally found relief. He painted their stories not with statistics, but with vivid compassion, turning policy into flesh and blood reality that every viewer at home could understand. It was clear that he had anticipated this exact moment. While Conway had come expecting to steamroll her way through the hearing with sheer rhetoric, Roumie had done the harder work, listening to people, learning their struggles, and preparing to give them a voice. So, to summarize, he concluded gently, every fear that's been raised here collapses when you actually look at the lives of the people who've already lived under these reforms. They're not hurting, they're healing. They're not collapsing, they're standing taller. He closed his notes, then fixed his gaze directly on Conway. So unless you have specific objections beyond shouting disaster, I think the American people have already seen enough screaming for one day. The silence that followed was deafening. Conway sat frozen, staring down at the table. Her earlier fury drained into an awkward stillness. Committee members glanced between the two, some suppressing smirks, others clearly uncomfortable. The chairman, desperate to escape the tension, called for a recess. But it was too late. The damage was done. In just 20 minutes, Roumie, an actor, not a politician, had shown more composure and conviction than one of Washington's most seasoned operators. As the cameras kept rolling, Roumie gathered his papers calmly, while Conway sat stiff, still processing the humiliation of being undone so thoroughly. The video was already racing across social media before anyone even left the room. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Clips of Conway's meltdown spliced against Roumie's serene smile became instant memes. One caption read, "When they scream, but you've actually listened to the people." Another viral tweet showed Roumie's calm expression with the words, "This is what truth looks like." Within half an hour, hashtag Roumie Smile was trending worldwide. Commentators from across the political spectrum weighed in. A Republican strategist admitted, "I disagree with him, but that was a clinic in how to handle a hostile opponent." Conway looked unprofessional. A Democratic analyst wrote, "This is the future of political discourse, calm, unflappable, and devastating when attacked." Even cable news hosts joined in. One tweeted a gif of Roumie's calm smile with the caption, "This smile just ended a career." By evening, every major network was running the story. Conservative outlets struggled to defend Conway's behavior. Headlines blared, "Veteran operative loses composure in hearing." The edited news packages made the contrast even sharper. Conway screaming, Roumie smiling. International media picked it up too. A British paper ran the headline, "Washington Meltdown Goes Viral." The immediate impact was brutal for Conway. Within 24 hours, compilations of her shouting were already being used against her allies in political ads. Donors pulled back, colleagues distanced themselves. The message was clear. Her brand of aggression was no longer an asset. For Roumie, the effect was the complete opposite. Bookers from every major network scrambled to get him on air. Organizations highlighted his composure as a model for how to face hostility with dignity. Donations poured into causes he supported, with notes like, "Thank you for showing us how it should be done." But the significance went beyond careers. Analysts began calling it a turning point. The old model of intimidation, volume, experience, reputation, had been neutralized by something far more powerful: preparation, authenticity, and grace under pressure. Roumie had not just won an exchange, he had shifted the standard. 6 months later, the echoes of that 20-minute confrontation were still being felt. His ability to stay calm, to cut through noise with clarity and compassion, made him one of the most sought-after voices in the country. And in Washington, a new lesson had taken hold. Sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't power, or volume, or experience. It's a calm smile and the truth behind it. Political commentators began speculating that Roumie's calm but commanding presence could launch him into new arenas of public influence. Some even half-jokingly listing him as a potential candidate for higher office, despite the fact that he wasn't even a politician. Conway, meanwhile, saw her credibility collapse. The incident crystallized long-standing concerns about her temperament and judgment. Former allies grew reluctant to appear with her publicly. The image of her red-faced meltdown replayed endlessly on screens across the country, a warning of how not to conduct oneself under pressure. But what mattered most wasn't just the damage to Conway. It was the example Roumie had set. The Roumie model: steady preparation, calm delivery, and letting opponents defeat themselves, became a new standard not only in politics, but across countless professional fields. Business schools added the clip to their leadership courses. Corporate trainers used it as a case study in handling hostile colleagues. Even faith-based and nonprofit organizations pointed to Roumie's composure as a symbol of grace under fire. The image of his calm smile in the face of Conway's shouting became iconic. Leadership experts called it a masterclass in emotional intelligence. By refusing to meet anger with anger, Roumie had demonstrated something Americans were desperate to see: the ability to stay anchored in truth and compassion when chaos swirled. Psychologists noted the impact of his body language, his steady breathing, relaxed posture, and serene expression. Studies showed viewers subconsciously associated his demeanor with trustworthiness and competence. Meanwhile, Conway's flailing hands and raised voice triggered impressions of instability and unreliability. Roumie's focus on people over politics proved devastating. Where Conway tried to lean on volume and reputation, Roumie grounded every word in lived experiences and stories that couldn't be dismissed. It wasn't about who could shout the loudest. It was about who had actually listened. He had done his homework in a different way, not through legal briefs and statutes, but by spending time with families, veterans, and working people whose lives were directly affected. What made him even more effective was his ability to translate their struggles into language anyone could understand. He bridged the gap between policy and humanity. This wasn't just intelligence, it was connection. And in that connection, Jonathan Roumie turned what should have been an attack into a career-defining victory, one that would echo far beyond the committee room. Perhaps most brilliantly, Roumie employed strategic patience. He let Conway destroy her own credibility instead of attacking her directly, proving that sometimes the best defense is silence, composure, and restraint. It required incredible discipline. Most people in his position would have felt compelled to shout back, to match Conway's volume, to prove themselves in the heat of the moment. Instead, Roumie recognized that she was handing him a gift, the opportunity to remain calm, professional, and dignified while his opponent unraveled in front of the cameras. This wasn't just instinct. It was a deep understanding of human psychology and media dynamics. Viewers weren't going to remember the policy jargon, they were going to remember the contrast. On one side, chaos and shouting. On the other, serenity and clarity. And Roumie understood something else. This wasn't just a committee hearing. It was a broadcast. Millions were watching, judging every second. His subtle glances into the camera, his stillness that kept both himself and Conway in the frame, his awareness of how his smile would read on screen. These were marks of someone who knew how to communicate not just to a room, but to a nation. Communication experts later said the confrontation would become standard teaching material. Business schools, media programs, even seminaries began showing clips of the Roumie smile as an example of how preparation, emotional intelligence, and calm presence can neutralize aggression. Most importantly, the incident established a new standard. The old model of winning by intimidation, shouting louder, pushing harder, relying on reputation, wasn't just ineffective anymore. It was counterproductive. Roumie's calm demeanor didn't just elevate him, it made Conway's behavior look worse by comparison. Looking back months later, people realized they hadn't simply watched a heated exchange. They had witnessed a shift, a changing of the guard. A new era where authenticity, composure, and connection carried more weight than bluster and intimidation. In our hyper-connected, social media-driven world, every moment can become a defining moment. And Roumie's lesson was simple. Character matters, preparation matters, composure matters. For anyone facing professional challenges, whether in politics, business, or everyday life, his example provided a powerful template. Do your homework, stay calm, let truth and compassion speak louder than volume. And sometimes the most powerful response to aggression is nothing more than a quiet, confident smile. The confrontation between Kellyanne Conway and Jonathan Roumie will be remembered as the day America learned a timeless truth. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest one. Sometimes the calmest presence, the one anchored in empathy and authenticity, can be the most devastating of all. And that serene Roumie smile, it didn't just win an argument, it defined a new way forward. And that's the power of staying calm when others lose control. If you enjoyed this showdown and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more coming your way.